On a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Santa Barbara, California, stands a French chateau that no one visited for more than 60 years, Bellosguardo. The name means beautiful lookout in Italian. 23 acres of manicured gardens, sweeping lawns, and a rose garden that bloomed for decades with no one to see it. A mansion of 27 rooms filled with priceless art, antique furniture, and collections that spanned continents. Cars in the garage with 1949 license plates, linens wrapped and dated from the 1960s, dishes washed, covered, and labeled from the 1990s. The woman who owned this property spent millions to maintain it in pristine condition while living in a hospital room in Manhattan. Huguette Marcel Clark was born in 1906 to one of the richest, most ruthless men in America. Her father's fortune came from copper mines that fueled the nation's electrification. Her childhood home in New York contained 121 rooms and required a private underground railroad just to deliver coal. She was educated in Paris, played the violin on a Stradivarius, and collected art that would make museums jealous. But tragedy marked her life from childhood. Her beloved sister died at 16. A marriage lasted less than 2 years. Her mother's death in 1963 severed her last connection to the outside world. For the final 2 decades of her life, Huguette Clark chose to live in a 14 by 24-foot hospital room rather than in any of her 3 palatial homes. She died in 2011 at the age of 104, leaving behind a $300 million fortune and mysteries that her silence never explained. This is the story of American wealth turned inward, of a woman who used her inheritance not to build or acquire, but to preserve and protect. Of a mansion that became a fortress against a world that had taken everything she loved. Understanding Huguette Clark requires understanding the Copper King who built an empire and the forces that drove his daughter into a solitude so complete that she became, in her own lifetime, a ghost. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you enjoy learning about the fascinating histories behind the world's most remarkable estates, consider subscribing to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. I love seeing how this community stretches across the globe, united by our shared curiosity about these architectural treasures. The story begins not in California, not in New York, but in the mining camps of Montana, where a Pennsylvania schoolteacher would transform himself into one of the 100 men who ruled America. Chapter 1. The Copper King's Kingdom. William Andrews Clark was born on January 8, 1839, in a log cabin in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. There was nothing in his childhood to suggest the empire he would build. His family moved to Iowa in 1856, where the 17-year-old William taught school and studied law at Iowa Wesleyan College. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall, with fastidiously tended red whiskers, unruly hair, and cold blue eyes that a contemporary described as having icicles in his handshake. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Clark joined the Confederate Army despite his northern upbringing. He deserted within a year, drawn westward by reports of gold strikes in Colorado. In 1862, he worked the quartz mines near Central City, learning the trade that would define his life. But Clark's real fortune began in 1863 when he moved to Montana Territory and settled in Bannock. His first claim yielded $1,500 in gold, a modest strike that became the seed of something far greater. Clark realized quickly that more money could be made supplying miners than mining itself. He drove mule trains between Salt Lake City and the Montana boomtowns, hauling eggs, tobacco, and basic supplies that desperate men paid premium prices for. He invested those profits in banking, extending credit to miners using their claims as collateral. When borrowers defaulted, Clark acquired the property. By the 1870s, Clark had shifted his focus to copper. The mountains around Butte, Montana, held some of the richest copper deposits on Earth. As America electrified its cities, demand for copper wire exploded. Clark understood that whoever controlled Montana copper would control a resource as valuable as Rockefeller's oil. He built smelters, acquired mines, and expanded aggressively. His Colorado Smelting and Mining Company became one of the largest operations in the territory. Clark's business empire extended beyond mining. He founded banks in Deer Lodge and Butte. He established the Butte Miner newspaper to promote his interests. He invested in timber, railroads, and land development. In 1902, he partnered with railroad magnate E.H. Harriman to construct the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad, creating the town of Las Vegas as a maintenance stop along the route. 110 acres were subdivided into 1,200 lots, some selling for $1,750 each. The fortune he accumulated rivaled anything in America. By 1907, the New York Times calculated that if you counted only liquid assets, John D. Rockefeller was wealthier. But if you included wealth still underground in copper deposits waiting to be extracted, William A. Clark might be the richest man in the country. His personal fortune eventually reached over $200 million, equivalent to roughly $31 billion in today's currency. But wealth alone wasn't enough for Clark. He craved political power and social acceptance. In 1884 and again in 1889, he served as president of Montana's constitutional conventions. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Clark immediately sought election to the United States Senate. He ran as a Democrat against Republican Marcus Daly, another copper magnate who became Clark's lifelong rival. Their battle for dominance consumed Montana politics for years. Clark lost his first Senate bid in 1890. Undeterred, he tried again in 1893 and lost once more. But in 1899, Clark's deep pockets finally achieved what talent and popularity could not. On December 4, 1899, the Montana legislature elected him to the Senate after Clark reportedly spent over $300,000 in bribes, an enormous sum at the time. The victory was short-lived. Political opponents filed petitions charging that Clark had purchased the seat through systematic bribery. The Senate Committee on Privileges and Elections investigated and heard testimony from 96 witnesses. The evidence was damning. Clark's agents had paid mortgages, purchased ranches, settled debts, financed banks, and presented envelopes of cash directly to legislators. Bribes ranged from $240 to $100,000. On April 23, 1900, the committee unanimously recommended that Clark be denied his seat. Rather than face formal censure, Clark resigned on May 15, 1900. He reportedly said afterward, "I never bought a man who wasn't for sale." Clark's nemesis Marcus Daly died in November 1900. With his chief rival gone, Clark ran again in 1901. This time, the newly elected legislature, many having received Clark's financial support during their campaigns, voted him into the Senate without opposition. He was seated on March 4, 1901, and served one undistinguished term until March 3, 1907. During his Senate years, Clark began construction of what would become known as Clark's Folly, the most ostentatious private residence New York had ever witnessed. The mansion at 77th Street and 5th Avenue took 8 years to complete. The Beaux-Arts Palace contained 121 rooms, 31 bathrooms, 4 art galleries, a swimming pool, a concealed garage, and Turkish baths. Wooden panels came from Sherwood Forest in England. Clark believed one panel bore an iron stain from a ring that Robin Hood himself had used to tie his horse. The house required a private underground railroad to deliver the several tons of coal needed daily for heating. The construction cost $7 million, equivalent to $162 million in today's currency. Clark filled the rooms with over 800 paintings, sculptures, and antiquities acquired during European travels. Degas, Monet, Renoir, and Turner hung on the walls. Oriental rugs covered floors. The collection would eventually be donated to the Corcoran Gallery in Washington. Mark Twain, a friend of Clark's rival Henry H. Rogers, wrote a scathing assessment in 1907. "He is as rotten a human being as can be found anywhere under the flag. He is a shame to the American nation, and no one has helped to send him to the Senate who did not know that his proper place was the penitentiary, with a ball and chain on his legs. To my mind, he is the most disgusting creature that the Republic has produced since Tweed's time." Yet this was the man whose fortune would shape Huguette Clark's life. His ruthlessness in acquiring wealth, his obsession with possessions, his drive to own and control everything around him. These qualities would manifest differently in his daughter, transform from aggression into retreat, from acquisition into preservation. But first, there was the matter of Clark's second wife. Chapter 2. the scandalous second wife. William Clark's first wife, Catherine Louise Stauffer, bore him 7 children between 1870 and 1883. They married in 1869, and by all accounts, the marriage was conventional for a man of Clark's ambitions. Catherine died in 1893. Shortly after her death, a teenage girl named Anna Eugenia La Chapelle came into Clark's orbit. Born on March 10, 1878, in Michigan to French-Canadian immigrant parents, Anna was raised in the copper mining town of Calumet. Her father, Peter La Chapelle, worked as a tailor. When he died, the family faced financial hardship. According to contemporary newspaper accounts, Senator Clark extended financial assistance to the bereaved family and finally induced them to allow him to make the girl his ward. Anna was approximately 15 years old when she became part of Clark's household. He sent her to Paris to study music, specifically the harp, paying for her education and living expenses. The nature of their relationship during these years remains unclear from surviving records. What is certain is that by 1901, when Anna was 23 and Clark was 62, they claimed to have married in France. No marriage certificate has ever been found by historians. On August 13, 1902, their first daughter was born in Spain and named Louise Amelia Andre Clark. The birth occurred while the couple was still traveling in Europe. For 3 years, Clark kept the marriage secret. He served in the United States Senate while maintaining this hidden family abroad. In 1904, rival newspapers discovered the truth and published the story. The Butte Miner, a newspaper Clark himself owned, was forced to acknowledge on its front page that their proprietor had been married for years to a woman 39 years his junior and already had a 2-year-old daughter. The scandal titillated Washington and Montana alike. Clark's political opponents published caricatures of Anna in their papers. Some depicted her as a gold digger who had trapped a wealthy old man. Others suggested Clark had taken advantage of a young ward. Why? Truth likely contained elements of both narratives, though Anna herself never publicly discussed the relationship's origins. On June 9, 1906, their second daughter was born in Paris. They named her Huguette Marcel Clark, the French name reflecting her birthplace on Avenue Victor Hugo in the fashionable 16th arrondissement. The family maintained homes in Paris, New York, and Butte, traveling frequently between them. Anna proved to be far more than a trophy wife. She was cultured, educated, and genuinely talented. Her harp playing reached professional levels. She collected antique fans with the same fervor her husband collected paintings. She spoke fluent French and raised her daughters to be bilingual. Photographs show a beautiful woman with delicate features and an elegant bearing, often photographed with her harps. The age difference was impossible to ignore. When Huguette was born, William Clark was 67 years old. He was already considered elderly by the standards of 1906. Anna, at 28, was young enough to be his granddaughter rather than his wife. Yet the marriage appears to have been genuine in its affection, at least from the available evidence. Photographs show the couple kissing, walking together, sharing moments of apparent intimacy. Anna brought a different sensibility to the Clark family. Where William was ostentatious and aggressive in his displays of wealth, Anna preferred privacy and refinement. As one contemporary noted, she did not care for social distinction, nor the obligations that would entail upon public life. This inclination toward privacy would profoundly influence Huguette. The family divided time between continents. Paris offered cultural sophistication that Montana and New York lacked. The girls attended French schools and grew comfortable in European aristocratic circles. Back in New York, they lived in the massive Fifth Avenue mansion where William's art collection surrounded them. In Montana, they visited the Copper King Mansion in Butte, a 34-room residence built between 1884 and 1888. Andre and Huguette were educated privately. From age 8, Huguette took violin lessons on a Stradivarius her father provided. She studied painting with various tutors. She attended Miss Spence's school in New York, an elite institution for wealthy daughters. The girls were photographed in the Easter parade on Fifth Avenue, wearing elaborate dresses and hats befitting their station. But childhood for the Clark daughters was not carefree. William Clark was frequently absent, managing his vast business empire. When present, he was exacting and demanding. The mansion on Fifth Avenue, while magnificent, was more museum than home. Servants outnumbered family members. The girls spent much time alone or with governesses, while their parents traveled or attended to business and social obligations. Anna tried to create warmth within the gilded cage, But the scale of their wealth made normal childhood impossible. Other children didn't live in houses with 121 rooms. Other children didn't have multiple Stradivarius violins to choose from. The isolation that money created would shape both daughters, but it would mark Huguette for life. In 1923, when Huguette was 17, William Clark made a purchase that would ultimately define his daughter's relationship with the world. He bought a property in Santa Barbara, California, on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. 23 acres with 1,000 feet of ocean frontage. The purchase price was reportedly $300,000 in cash, equivalent to over $4 million in today's dollars. The property came with an existing mansion built by the William Miller Graham family. But Clark had grander visions. This would be a summer estate, a place where Anna and the girls could escape New York's heat and Montana's harsh winters. What he couldn't know as he signed the papers in 1923 was that he would be dead within 2 years, and that this property would become the stage for one of the most peculiar preservation stories in American history. Chapter 3. A California Dream Takes Shape. Santa Barbara in the early 1920s was transforming from frontier outpost to fashionable resort. The Spanish colonial architecture that defines the city today was just beginning to emerge, driven by regulations enacted after the 1925 earthquake that would soon devastate the area. The Bellosguardo property occupied a unique position. It sat high on the bluffs at the eastern edge of town, commanding views that stretched from the Channel Islands to the Santa Ynez Mountains. The Pacific Ocean crashed against rocks far below. Across East Cabrillo Boulevard lay a 42-acre saltwater marsh that would later be transformed into the Andre Clark Bird Refuge. William Graham, the previous owner, had built an Italianate-style villa on the property and given it the name Bellosguardo. The house was substantial but not grand by the standards Clark's family was accustomed to. Still, the location was unmatched. The property stretched deep enough to accommodate extensive gardens, guest cottages, and service buildings while maintaining the dramatic ocean views. William Clark purchased Bellosguardo in the autumn of 1923. He was 84 years old, his health beginning to fail. The family began using the property as a winter retreat, escaping the cold of New York and Montana for California's mild climate. Then, on June 29, 1925, at 6:42 in the morning, an earthquake measuring 6.3 struck Santa Barbara. The quake lasted between 10 and 15 seconds, but caused devastating damage throughout the city. Buildings collapsed, walls crumbled. The business district was nearly destroyed. At Bellosguardo, the Graham mansion sustained significant structural damage. Walls cracked, chimneys toppled. The building remained standing but was rendered unsafe for habitation. The earthquake occurred just months after William Clark's death on March 2, 1925. He died in New York at age 86, never having seen what the Santa Barbara property would become. Clark left his fortune divided among his surviving children from both marriages. Huguette, as his youngest child, later received a bonus inheritance, Bellosguardo itself. But the damaged mansion created an immediate decision for Anna. She could repair the Graham house and restore it to its former condition, or she could demolish it and build something entirely her own. Anna Clark chose to rebuild, but first she waited. In 1927, the Fifth Avenue mansion in New York was finally demolished. The house had stood for only 20 years. William had specified in his will that it should be sold, but no buyer could be found for a house that required a small army to maintain. The building came down, and its furnishings and art were dispersed. The elaborate Sherwood Forest panels, the Turkish baths, the marble staircases, all vanished. Anna and her daughters moved to apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue, a far more modest address despite occupying an entire floor. The change marked a shift in the family's public profile. Where William had demanded attention through ostentatious display, Anna preferred privacy. She and Huguette occupied separate but connected apartments, maintaining independence while remaining close. With the New York mansion gone and the Graham house in Santa Barbara damaged beyond practical repair, Anna turned her attention to creating a California home that reflected her own aesthetic rather than her husband's excesses. She hired Reginald Davis Johnson, the architect, who had designed the Santa Barbara Biltmore Hotel. Johnson understood the balance between grandeur and restraint that Anna sought. The design took shape through 1928 and 1929. Anna wanted a French chateau, specifically an 18th century style with Georgian influences. The house would be U-shaped, wrapping around a central courtyard. The structure would be entirely concrete, including walls, floors, and ceilings, all finished in various fine woods. The exterior would be clad in a 3-inch thick veneer of Indiana limestone. This was critical in earthquake-prone California. The Graham Mansion's collapse had demonstrated the vulnerability of traditional construction methods. Anna's new house would be built to survive anything the San Andreas Fault could produce. The concrete core and limestone exterior created a fortress that looked elegant but was fundamentally indestructible. 27 rooms would fill the main house, including 6 bedrooms for family and 3 smaller bedrooms for servants. The scale was substantial, but nowhere near the excess of Williams' 121-room monument in New York. Anna was building a home, not a museum. The Great Depression began in 1929, just as planning for the new Bellosguardo reached completion. The timing proved fortunate. Construction provided work for dozens of skilled laborers who otherwise faced unemployment. Anna made sure crews were well fed and fairly paid. The project became one of the larger employers in Santa Barbara during those difficult years. Construction began in earnest in 1930. Crews excavated the foundation and poured massive amounts of concrete. The U-shape took form, with wings extending to create the protected courtyard. Interior spaces began to emerge, rooms that would remain unchanged for the next 80 years. Johnson incorporated details that reflected Anna's taste for understated elegance. Wood paneling throughout, elaborate cornices, chandeliers that provided light without overwhelming the spaces, a music room for Anna's harps, a library filled with carefully selected volumes, an artist's studio with 17-foot ceilings where Huguette could paint and pursue photography. The grounds received equal attention. A stone courtyard with floral designs was laid in front of the mansion. Sweeping lawns stretched toward the ocean. A circular rose garden was planted, with each variety of rose carefully recorded and mapped for future maintenance. Paths wound through plantings of native and exotic species. By 1933, 4 years after the Depression began, the new Bellosguardo was complete. 22,000 square feet of living space, formal gardens that required a full-time staff, ocean views from virtually every room. The house Anna Clark built represented everything her late husband's Fifth Avenue monstrosity was not: refined, elegant, permanent, and private. The cost of construction was never publicly disclosed, but estimates suggest millions of dollars at Depression-era prices. For Anna, this was an investment in her daughter's future, a place they could retreat when the world became too demanding, a fortress of beauty where memories could be preserved and grief could be processed away from public scrutiny. What Anna could not have predicted was that the house she built as a refuge would become a monument to absence, that it would stand frozen in time for over half a century, maintained but uninhabited, that the daughter who loved it would choose to remember it from 3,000 miles away, rather than risk returning and confronting the ghosts it contained. Everything changed in 1919. The year that marked Huguette Clark forever was the year her sister died. Chapter 4. Tragedy in the Gilded Cage. Louise Amelia Andre Clark, called Andre by family and friends, was everything a Gilded Age daughter should be. Born in Spain in 1902, raised between Paris and New York, educated by the finest tutors, surrounded by art and music and every advantage wealth could provide. Photographs show a beautiful girl with delicate features and her mother's elegant bearing. She played the harp like Anna. She traveled to Europe regularly. At the Mowitza Lodge in Montana, owned by her half-brother William Andrews Clark, Jr., she posed for photographs with Huguette and other family members, smiling at the camera with the confidence of youth and privilege. In the spring of 1919, Andre fell ill. The symptoms appeared suddenly: fever, severe headache, neck stiffness, sensitivity to light. The doctors diagnosed meningitis, a bacterial infection of the protective membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord. In 1919, before the development of antibiotics, meningitis was often a death sentence. Andre died on September 6, 1919, 1 week before her 17th birthday. The loss devastated the family. William Clark, then 80 years old, had already buried children from his first marriage. But Andre's death struck differently. She was young, on the threshold of adult life, taken without warning. For Anna, the grief was unbearable. Andre had been her firstborn, the daughter who shared her love of music and French culture. The empty space she left could never be filled, but the impact on 13-year-old Huguette may have been even more profound. Andre had been her only sibling from Anna's marriage to William. The two girls had been constant companions, navigating the strange world of extreme wealth together. In photographs from before Andre's death, Huguette often stands slightly behind her older sister, as if sheltering in her shadow. After Andre's death, Huguette stood alone. The massive Fifth Avenue mansion felt emptier than ever. The collection of dolls that Huguette had been assembling since childhood took on new significance. Dolls didn't die. Dolls could be controlled, dressed, arranged, and preserved exactly as you wanted them. Dolls would never leave. William Clark threw himself into memorializing his lost daughter. He donated 135 acres to the Girl Scouts in Andre's honor. The property in Briarcliff Manor, New York, became Camp Andre Clark, a place where girls could experience the outdoor activities that Andre had enjoyed. The camp continues to operate today. In California, Huguette would later fund the creation of the Andre Clark Bird Refuge, transforming the saltwater marsh across from Bellosguardo into a freshwater lake. In 1928, she donated $50,000, equivalent to over $900,000 in today's currency, to excavate the pond and create an artificial ecosystem. She made additional donations in 1930 and 1989 to maintain the sanctuary. The refuge became a popular destination for birdwatchers and nature lovers, a living memorial to the sister Huguette, lost at 13. On the Bellosguardo property itself, a rustic thatched roof cottage built by the Graham family was renamed Andre's Cottage. It stood as a physical reminder of the girl who should have grown old in this place, but never would. The years after Andre's death marked Huguette's transformation from a child to a young woman, but they also marked her withdrawal from public life. She graduated from Miss Spence's school in New York. She continued her art studies, showing genuine talent for painting. She collected dolls with increasing fervor, acquiring French bisque dolls from the golden age of 1860 to 1890, Japanese cultural dolls, and custom pieces commissioned from master craftsmen. In 1925, William Clark died at age 86. His death, coming just 6 years after Andre's, left Huguette and Anna alone together. The Fifth Avenue mansion was demolished in 1927. They moved to the apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue, occupying the entire 12th floor and eventually expanding to occupy portions of the floor above. The apartment became Huguette's refuge. Whole rooms were devoted to her doll collection. Display cases lined the walls, miniature furniture filled tables. She employed staff specifically to maintain the dolls, including someone to iron their tiny dresses and keep everything in perfect order. Anna encouraged Huguette's artistic pursuits. She hired the renowned Polish artist Tadeusz Stika to provide painting instruction. Stika had painted portraits of Anna herself and understood the family's desire for discretion. Under his guidance, Huguette developed a distinctive style, often depicting Japanese subjects, beautiful women in kimonos, geishas in elaborate settings, and meticulously detailed still lifes. In April 1929, just months before the stock market crash, the Corcoran Gallery in Washington held a small exhibition that included 7 of Huguette's paintings. The show ran for 2 weeks. It would be the only public display of her work during her lifetime. Reviewers praised the technical skill and attention to detail, noting the artist's obvious dedication to her craft. But public recognition held no appeal for Huguette. She preferred the solitude of her studio, the company of her dolls, and the safety of her mother's presence. The outside world had taken her father and her sister. What else might it take if she gave it the chance? In December 1927, newspapers announced Huguette's engagement to William MacDonald Gower, a law student and Princeton graduate. The wedding was set for the following summer at Bellosguardo, the California estate that was still under construction. It seemed perhaps that Huguette might step back into public life. That marriage might pull her from the isolation that had begun with Andre's death. The reality would prove far different. The marriage that was supposed to save Huguette from loneliness would instead drive her deeper into seclusion. Chapter 5. Anna's Masterpiece. While Huguette's ill-fated marriage played out, Anna Clark poured her energy and resources into creating the new Bellosguardo. Construction accelerated through 1931 and 1932. The U-shaped mansion rose on the cliff, its Indiana limestone exterior catching the Pacific light. Reginald Johnson had studied at MIT and worked with several prominent California architects before establishing his own practice. His designs combined classical European influences with practical considerations for California living. At Bellosguardo, he created spaces that flowed naturally while maintaining distinct characters. The entrance opened to a high-ceilinged foyer that stretched toward both wings, revealing views of a reflecting pool in the rear courtyard. 80-year-old oak trees would eventually frame this view, but in the early days, the landscape was still new, waiting to mature. The main hall served as the spine of the house. Guests entering would see immediately through to the back, where the courtyard offered a protected outdoor room. The positioning took advantage of Santa Barbara's climate, allowing nearly year-round use of these transitional spaces. To the right, the music room featured acoustics carefully designed for Anna's harp performances. Built-in shelves held her collection of antique fans. Windows looked out toward the ocean, providing natural light that changed throughout the day. The dining room occupied a prominent position in the left wing. A painted canvas ceiling depicted classical scenes. The room could seat large dinner parties, though Anna preferred intimate gatherings. Fine wood paneling lined the walls. Details throughout reflected Johnson's attention to proportion and light. The library held thousands of volumes, organized by subject and language. French literature filled entire sections. Art books documented centuries of painting, sculpture, and architecture. The collection represented not just decoration, but Anna's genuine love of learning and culture. Upstairs, bedroom suites offered privacy for family members and overnight guests. Each room had its own distinct character while maintaining the overall aesthetic harmony. Bathrooms featured fixtures and tile work that reflected the 1930s highest standards. Huguette's private wing received special attention. Besides her painting studio with its 17-foot ceilings, this section included a loft space for storing canvases, a private kitchenette, and a back stairway leading to her bedroom and sitting room. The design allowed her complete privacy when desired, letting her disappear into her art for hours without interruption. The concrete construction that Johnson specified proved its worth almost immediately. Small earthquakes that rattled other buildings left Bellosguardo unaffected. The 3-inch Indiana limestone veneer provided both beauty and additional structural support. The house Anna built would survive anything California could throw at it. The grounds required as much attention as the house itself. The circular rose garden alone took months to design and plant. Each variety was selected for its color, fragrance, and blooming season. The goal was year-round color, an ever-changing display that would surprise and delight on every visit. The formal stone courtyard in front featured intricate floral patterns laid in different colored stones. Masons worked for weeks creating these designs, following drawings that Anna reviewed personally. No detail was too small for her attention. Paths were designed to lead visitors on journeys of discovery. One might begin at the main house, wander through the rose garden, visit Andre's cottage, descend toward the ocean views, then return via a different route that revealed entirely new perspectives. The 23 acres felt larger through careful landscaping that created distinct zones and surprise vistas. The service buildings were placed strategically out of sight from the main house, but easily accessible for staff. A garage held the family's automobiles. Storage buildings protected garden equipment and supplies. Staff quarters provided comfortable living spaces for the small permanent crew. Water features added sound and movement to the gardens. The reflecting pool in the rear courtyard mirrored the sky and surrounding architecture. Fountains provided focal points at key intersections of paths. The plantings required sophisticated irrigation systems to thrive in Santa Barbara's Mediterranean climate. By the spring of 1933, 7 years after the earthquake that damaged the original Graham Mansion, Anna's vision was complete. The house appraised conservatively at $85 million in today's dollars, though the true value was incalculable. How do you price a home built to last centuries? How do you quantify a mother's attempt to create a perfect refuge for her surviving daughter? Anna and Huguette began spending extended periods at Bellosguardo. They would arrive in the autumn and remain through spring, escaping New York's harsh winters for California's gentle seasons. The house functioned exactly as Anna intended, a private sanctuary where they could live on their own terms. There were occasional gatherings. Anna maintained friendships from her years in New York and Montana. She hosted tea parties and small dinners, elegant affairs where conversation flowed in French and English. But these events were carefully controlled, guest lists limited to people Anna trusted completely. Huguette continued painting in her studio. The 17-foot ceilings and excellent natural light created ideal working conditions. She produced landscapes, portraits, and still lifes, working in oils with meticulous attention to detail. Some depicted views from the Bellosguardo windows. Others captured memories of New York or imagined scenes from Japan, a culture she had come to love through her doll collecting. The relationship between mother and daughter grew even closer in this California sanctuary. They spoke French together, maintaining the language of Huguette's childhood. They shared meals, walked the gardens, and spent quiet evenings with books and music. Anna played her harp while Huguette painted or worked on her doll collections. For nearly 2 decades, this pattern continued. Autumn to spring in California, summer months in New York at the Fifth Avenue apartments. Occasional trips to Connecticut, where Huguette had purchased a property in 1952 as an emergency retreat, though they rarely used it. The Depression raged outside their gates, but inside Bellosguardo, life maintained its elegant rhythm. Anna's wealth, inherited from William and carefully managed by financial advisors, proved more than sufficient to maintain their lifestyle. The stock market crash that devastated millions barely touched the Clark fortune. War came to Europe and then to America. World War II changed the country profoundly, but at Bellosguardo, time seemed suspended. Huguette continued her art. Anna played her harp. The gardens bloomed and were meticulously maintained. The house stood perfect and unchanged. Then in 1963, after 29 years of living together in their California refuge, Anna Clark died. She was 85 years old. Her death occurred in New York, in the apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue, where she and Huguette had lived since the demolition of William's mansion. Huguette, now 57 years old, inherited Bellosguardo outright. She also inherited the Fifth Avenue apartments, the Connecticut property, and Anna's collections. Most importantly, she inherited solitude. For the first time in her life, Huguette Clark was alone. She gave 2 instructions to the Bellosguardo staff: keep everything in first-class condition and make no changes. Nothing, not the furniture arrangement, not the art on the walls, not the roses in the circular garden. Bellosguardo would remain exactly as it had been the last time Anna saw it, forever. What Huguette couldn't bring herself to do was return. The house held too many memories of Anna, too many echoes of the mother who had been her constant companion, her protector, her connection to the world. To visit Bellosguardo would be to confront Anna's absence in every room, every garden path, every sunset view over the Pacific. So she didn't go back. The last time Huguette Clark set foot in Bellosguardo was sometime in the early 1950s, a decade before Anna's death. She would live another 48 years without ever returning to the house her mother built for her. Chapter 6. The Marriage That Never Was. On August 18, 1928, 22-year-old Huguette Marcel Clark married William MacDonald Gower at Bellosguardo. The property was still under construction, with crews working to finish the new mansion Anna was building to replace the earthquake-damaged Graham House. But the grounds were ready, and the ceremony proceeded despite the ongoing work. Gower was 24 years old, a Princeton graduate studying law. More significantly, he was the son of William B. Gower, one of William A. Clark's top accountants. The families had known each other for years. The match seemed sensible from every practical standpoint. The ceremony was private, limited to immediate family and a handful of close friends. No photographs exist in public archives. This itself was unusual for a wedding of someone from such a prominent family, but Anna had always protected her daughters from publicity. The couple exchanged vows surrounded by the California landscape that would become Huguette's most beloved place, though she would ultimately choose to love it from afar. The honeymoon took the newlyweds to San Francisco. A photographer captured Huguette during this trip, producing what would become the last known public photograph of her. She appears in a dark dress and cloche hat, her face showing an expression one reporter later described as sad. The wedding night, according to fragments of information that emerged decades later, was a disaster. Years afterward, Huguette told people that the marriage was never consummated. The full details of what happened that night or in the days following remained locked within Huguette's private memories. She could never bring herself to reveal them fully, even to close confidants. Whatever occurred, it was traumatic enough to end any possibility of a normal married life. The couple separated within a year. They divorced in Reno, Nevada on August 11, 1930. The marriage had lasted less than 2 years, most of that time spent living apart. Huguette returned to her mother in the Fifth Avenue apartments. She chose to be known afterward as Mrs. Huguette Clark rather than reverting to Miss, perhaps as a shield against questions about her unmarried state. Rumors circulated for decades about the marriage's failure. Some suggested Gower had been paid by Anna to marry Huguette, with estimates as high as $1 million. Others whispered about incompatibility or hidden scandals. The truth remained known only to Huguette and Gower himself, and both maintained absolute silence. The divorce marked a turning point in Huguette's withdrawal from society. By the late 1930s, her name had disappeared entirely from the social pages that once chronicled Gilded Age families. While contemporaries attended charity balls and cultural events, Huguette remained in her apartments, surrounded by her growing collections. She never attempted another relationship, never showed romantic interest in anyone. The brief marriage to Gower apparently convinced her that such connections brought only pain and complications. Better to live with Anna, where love was unconditional and expectations were understood. The failed marriage reinforced patterns that had begun with Andre's death. Loss followed by retreat, disappointment leading to greater isolation, each wound driving Huguette further into the protective bubble her wealth allowed her to create. The world offered nothing but reasons to hide. Anna, for her part, never pressured Huguette to try again. If anything, the divorce must have confirmed Anna's own instincts. She and Huguette were better together, just the two of them, protected by wealth and privacy from the dangers lurking beyond their carefully maintained walls. The years that followed the divorce were quiet ones. Huguette painted in her studio. She corresponded with doll makers and art dealers through attorneys, maintaining anonymity even in her collecting. She studied Japanese culture with increasing intensity, commissioning miniature temples and castles built by master craftsmen in Japan. This obsession with Japan would later draw unwanted attention, but in the 1930s it seemed merely eccentric. Wealthy collectors pursued all manner of interests. Why? Shouldn't Huguette Clark develop expertise in Japanese dolls and architecture? The FBI would eventually ask that question with more suspicion. Chapter 7. The Collector's Obsession. In the wake of her failed marriage, Huguette Clark found solace in acquisition. But this wasn't the aggressive accumulation her father had practiced. William A. Clark had bought art to prove his cultivation, to compete with other wealthy collectors, to fill his enormous mansion with trophies of his travels and taste. Huguette collected for entirely different reasons. Her dolls weren't meant to impress anyone. They were companions, families that never aged or left, faces that would always smile exactly the same way, perfect little beings she could control completely. The collection began in childhood, but accelerated through the 1930s. French bisque dolls from the golden age of 1860 to 1890 became her primary focus. These were the creations of master doll makers like Jumeau, Bru, and Steiner. Each doll was a work of art, with hand-painted faces, glass eyes that seemed alive, and elaborate costumes sewn from silk and lace. Huguette corresponded anonymously with Thériault's, the world's premier doll auction house, through her attorneys. For decades, the auctioneers exchanged notes and catalogs with one of their most prominent collectors, without knowing her identity. Bidding wars erupted at auctions as Huguette's representatives competed for rare pieces. The collection grew to hundreds of dolls, each carefully maintained and displayed in the Fifth Avenue apartments. But French dolls were only part of the obsession. Huguette developed a profound fascination with Japanese culture. She began collecting Japanese cultural dolls depicting court ladies, geishas, and traditional figures. These dolls came dressed in authentic kimonos, their hair arranged in historically accurate styles, every detail perfect. This led to even more elaborate commissions. Huguette contacted artisans in Japan to create miniature architectural models. Not simple dollhouses, but scale replicas of temples, castles, tea houses, and shops. She specified exact details through detailed correspondence, telegraphing instructions about materials and construction methods. For one miniature temple, Huguette requested permission from the Japanese government to use a rare cedar wood typically reserved only for imperial buildings and castles. The permission was granted, likely due to substantial payment. The resulting model demonstrated craftsmanship that rivaled full-scale structures. The cost of these commissions was staggering. A single custom dollhouse could run into tens of thousands of dollars. Huguette spent lavishly, never questioning prices if the quality met her standards. She stored the completed models in her apartments, entire rooms dedicated to these miniature worlds. The attention to detail extended to every aspect. For a Japanese cake shop model, Huguette specified the exact types of sweets that should be displayed, researched the authentic shop layouts, and required the artisans to use traditional building techniques scaled down precisely. Nothing was too small to matter. Her spending on Black Thursday, October 24, 1929, when the stock market crashed, revealed her priorities. While the nation panicked and fortunes evaporated, Huguette visited Cartier 4 days later. On October 28th, she purchased emerald, pearl, and diamond earrings for $15,500, a diamond wristwatch for $2,640, and a diamond bracelet for $3,125. The jewelry joined her collections while the economy collapsed around her. Then came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack that brought America into World War II devastated Huguette emotionally. She had spent years studying Japanese culture, celebrating its arts corresponding with Japanese craftsmen. Now Japan was the enemy. The FBI took notice of anyone with significant Japanese connections. Huguette's extensive purchases and ongoing correspondence made her a person of interest. Federal agents reviewed her shipping documents and found something unusual. One elaborate dollhouse came with documentation from the Japanese government regarding the rare cedar used in its construction. The FBI requested a conversation. What followed were months of what Huguette's attorney later described as interrogations rather than interviews. Agents questioned her loyalty, her motivations, her contacts in Japan. They wanted to know if her dollhouse commissions might be covers for espionage. The idea was absurd, but paranoia ran high in wartime. For someone as private and anxious as Huguette, the experience proved traumatic. Government agents in her home demanding answers, suspecting her of treason. Some historians suggest this ordeal marked the beginning of her fear of the outside world. If loving Japanese art could bring the FBI to her door, what other dangers lurked beyond her protective walls? The investigation eventually concluded with no charges. Huguette was clearly just a collector, however eccentric, but the damage was done. She stopped corresponding with Japanese dealers. She ceased commissioning new pieces. The collection remained frozen at its pre-war size, a monument to an enthusiasm curtailed by suspicion. Other collections continued to grow. She owned 4 Stradivarius violins, including La Pucelle, the Virgin, made in 1709. Her mother had given her the priceless instrument. It would eventually sell for $6 million after Huguette's death. She acquired important paintings, a Pierre-Auguste Renoir from 1882 titled In the Roses, a Claude Monet water lily painting from 1907 that she purchased in 1930. These weren't investment pieces. They were companions, beautiful objects to contemplate in solitude. But the dolls remained her greatest passion. She employed staff specifically to maintain them, someone to dust the display cases, someone to iron the tiny dresses, keeping every pleat perfect, someone to check on the dollhouses, ensuring no miniature detail had shifted out of place. In her Fifth Avenue apartments, entire rooms became doll museums. Glass cases lined the walls. Shelves held hundreds of figures. The miniature Japanese buildings occupied whole tables. Visitors, on the rare occasions Huguette allowed them, found themselves in a strange world where play and obsession blurred together. The collecting served multiple purposes. It gave Huguette projects to pursue without leaving home. It provided constant occupation for a mind that might otherwise dwell on losses. It created a universe she could control absolutely, where nothing unexpected ever happened. Most importantly, the dolls never died. Unlike André, unlike her father, unlike everyone she had loved, these perfect little beings would last forever with proper care. They demanded nothing but attention and money, both of which Huguette had in abundance. They offered something she couldn't find anywhere else, guaranteed permanence in a world defined by impermanence. Chapter 8. The Artist Hidden from View. While the dolls received most attention from those who later chronicled Huguette Clark's life, her paintings revealed a different side of her character. The precision she demanded in doll construction she applied to her own artistic work. The aesthetic sense she developed through collecting, she expressed through oil on canvas. Huguette had been drawing and painting since childhood. Her father's art collection exposed her to masters like Degas, Monet, and Renoir from her earliest years. She understood composition, color, and technique from this constant immersion in great art. But formal training came when Anna hired Tadej Stika as Huguette's instructor. Stika was a Polish-born artist who specialized in portraits of socialite women. He had painted Anna herself, capturing her elegance and refinement. He understood the Clark family's need for discretion and their appreciation for technical excellence over trendy experimentation. Under Stika's guidance, Huguette developed a style that combined academic precision with deeply personal subject choices. She mixed her own oil paints, learning the chemistry and properties of pigments. At a time when most women artists worked in watercolors or pastels, Huguette insisted on oils, the same medium as the old masters. Many of her surviving paintings depict Japanese subjects. Beautiful women in elaborate kimonos stand before painted screens. Geishas hold fans or read letters in meticulously rendered interiors. The attention to detail in these works demonstrates Huguette's deep study of Japanese culture. She didn't just copy photographs or other paintings. She understood the construction of kimonos, the proper arrangement of hair ornaments, the architectural elements of traditional rooms. One painting shows a geisha in an interior holding a fan before a painted screen. The screen itself depicts a landscape with a castle, and that landscape became the subject of its own separate painting. Huguette would take details from one work and expand them into complete compositions, exploring different aspects of the same visual world. Her signature on these Japanese paintings appeared in katakana, the Japanese script. Critics later noted that her strokes showed she was copying rather than fluently writing the characters, but the gesture demonstrated her commitment to authenticity. She studied Japanese art not as a tourist, but as a serious practitioner, attempting to understand it from within. Other works showed different influences. Self-portraits revealed Huguette's view of herself as a serious artist. In one painting, she stands before a canvas holding a palette, her expression focused and determined. The work was unsigned, but attributed to her based on style and provenance. It presented Huguette as she wanted to be seen, not as a wealthy heiress playing at art, but as a painter engaged in meaningful work. Landscape paintings demonstrated her mastery of perspective and atmospheric effects. One remarkable piece titled "Seen from My Window After a Snowstorm" depicts the view from 907 Fifth Avenue across Central Park. The window frame itself is painted as a frame, and Huguette signed the mullion. The Dakota Building is visible across the park, confirming the viewpoint. The painting measured 50 by 43 inches, a substantial canvas that required weeks or months to complete. The work invites comparison to other wealthy New Yorkers' painting park views in the same era. Florine Stettheimer created a Christmas scene across the Central Park skating pond around 1925. Charles Sheeler made drawings of West Side views for Abby Aldrich Rockefeller in 1932. What a peculiar moment in history when multiple rich collectors were painting similar Central Park vistas from their exclusive apartments. But while Stettheimer and Sheeler pursued modernist approaches, Huguette remained firmly academic in technique. Her snowstorm scene demonstrates careful observation of how snow accumulates on branches and rooftops. The light has that particular quality of winter afternoons in New York when clouds reflect city glow. These aren't details invented for effect. They come from looking, from actual attention to the visible world. Still life paintings showed the same precision. Arrangements of flowers, fruits, and objects demonstrated classical composition skills. Colors were mixed with care to achieve exact values. Surfaces revealed understanding of how light interacts with different materials. The single public exhibition of Huguette's work occurred at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington in the spring of 1929. William A. Clark had donated his extensive art collection to the Corcoran, along with funding for a Clark wing. 4 years after his death, the museum mounted a small show that included 7 of Huguette's paintings. The exhibition ran for just 2 weeks. Reviews praised the technical competence and attention to detail. But Huguette had no interest in pursuing recognition as an artist. The public display made her uncomfortable. She preferred the private satisfaction of creation to the public scrutiny of exhibition. After 1929, her paintings remained hidden. She continued working in her studio at the Fifth Avenue Apartments and at Bellosguardo, producing canvas after canvas. But no gallery ever showed them again during her lifetime. They accumulated in storage, in closets, in corners of rooms, unseen by anyone except Huguette, Anna, and occasional staff members who maintained the apartments. The paintings finally emerged publicly in 2022, when the Santa Barbara Historical Museum mounted an exhibition of works brought from New York storage. Visitors encountering these paintings for the first time expressed surprise at their quality. Many expected dilettante work, the kind of amateurish efforts produced by bored rich people with too much time. Instead, they found accomplished paintings by someone who had devoted thousands of hours to mastering her craft. Approximately 40 of Huguette's paintings were eventually displayed at Bellosguardo when the mansion opened for public tours. They hang in the studio where she once worked, providing insight into her inner life that court documents and news reports could never capture. The paintings reveal someone who saw beauty and wanted to preserve it. Someone who understood that oil on canvas could capture moments and hold them forever. Someone who, like her dolls and her empty mansions, preferred the permanent to the transient. Art offered the same promise as collecting, control over something beautiful that would never change, never disappoint, never die. Chapter 9. Mother's Death and Deeper Withdrawal. On October 11, 1963, Anna Eugenia Clark died in New York at age 85. She had been Huguette's constant companion for 57 years. More than a mother, she had been Huguette's connection to the world, her translator, her shield against outside pressures. Now that shield was gone. Huguette inherited everything. The apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue became entirely hers. Bellosguardo passed to her ownership. The Connecticut property called Le Beau Chateau, purchased in 1952 as a Cold War retreat, but never really used, became hers, alone. Anna's collections of fans and musical instruments joined Huguette's already extensive possessions. Most importantly, Huguette inherited complete freedom to live exactly as she chose. No parents to consider, no siblings to consult, no husband to accommodate. At 57 years old, she could structure her life entirely around her own comfort and preferences. She gave the Bellosguardo staff their instructions immediately. Keep everything in first-class condition. Make no changes. The house should remain exactly as it had been when Anna last saw it. Every piece of furniture in its proper place, every painting on its assigned wall, every rose variety in the circular garden. The staff took these instructions literally. They cleaned and maintained, but never updated or altered. When carpets and draperies needed protection, they were carefully wrapped in brown paper, dated and signed by the housemen. Dishes were washed, covered, and dated in the 1990s. Automobiles sat in the garage with 1949 license plates still attached. Time stopped at Bellosguardo in 1963. The cost of this preservation ran approximately $40,000 per month. Staff salaries, utilities, gardening, repairs, insurance, property taxes. The expenses mounted year after year while Huguette remained in New York. Her financial advisors managed investments carefully, ensuring income exceeded even these substantial carrying costs. In Manhattan, Huguette began expanding her footprint at 907 Fifth Avenue. She owned the entire 12th floor, which Anna had occupied. She acquired portions of the floor above, eventually controlling approximately 15,000 square feet across multiple units. Different apartments served different purposes, one for living, one for dolls, one for paintings and collections, each maintained separately. The expansion provided space, but also isolation. Huguette could move between apartments without encountering neighbors. She could store her collections without crowding her living spaces. She could live entirely within this self-contained world, never needing to venture beyond her own doors. And increasingly, she didn't venture out. By the late 1960s, neighbors and building staff realized they never saw Mrs. Clark anymore. She had stopped going out entirely, not to shop, not to galleries or museums, not even to walk in Central Park, visible from her windows, but apparently too dangerous to actually visit. Staff visited to clean and maintain, but Huguette arranged her schedule to avoid them. She would retreat to a different apartment when they arrived, leaving notes about what needed attention. The cleaning crew worked in one space while she hid in another. They saw evidence of her presence but rarely encountered her directly. Groceries were delivered. Supplies arrived via service elevators. Everything she needed came to her. The fortune William A. Clark amassed through ruthless extraction of Montana copper now funded his daughter's extraction from human society. The isolation bred suspicion. Huguette developed fears that people were after her money. Every approach, every request, every attempt at contact seemed potentially motivated by greed. Her wealth made her a target, or so she believed. Better to trust no one, better to hide behind wealth's protective barriers. The irony wasn't lost on observers who later studied her life. William A. Clark had fought for social acceptance, building his absurd mansion to prove his cultivation. His daughter used that same wealth to avoid society entirely. The fortune that was supposed to open doors became the lock that kept them sealed. Television became her primary connection to current events and culture. She loved cartoons. The Smurfs and the Flintstones particularly delighted her. Hospital staff who later cared for her noted that conversations would often shift unexpectedly to these shows. Huguette, eager to discuss animated characters with the same enthusiasm she once brought to Japanese art. She read voraciously. Books arrived from dealers who specialized in her interests. Art books, histories, biographies of musicians and painters, French novels that reminded her of childhood. The reading kept her mind engaged even as her physical world contracted. But all the reading and television couldn't address the fundamental problem: loneliness. Anna had filled that void. After her death, nothing could. The dolls provided some comfort. The paintings offered creative outlets. But ultimately, Huguette was alone in a way she had never been before. She began to see herself as vulnerable, aging without family, wealthy but unprotected. The apartment building felt less secure. What if there was a fire? What if someone broke in? What if she fell and no one found her? These fears intensified through the 1970s and 80s. Huguette's world continued shrinking. She spoke primarily in French, making it difficult for many English speakers to understand conversations. She avoided written communication except through attorneys. The distance between her and the outside world widened yearly. In 1991, she was 85 years old, the same age Anna had been when she died. Huguette had grown frail. She had trouble seeing and eating. Something was wrong with her face, but she had avoided doctors for so long that diagnosis required emergency intervention. On March 26, 1991, Huguette Clark was admitted to Doctors Hospital on Manhattan's Upper East Side. She had basal cell cancer lesions that had disfigured her face. The cancer was treatable, the doctors assured her. A few weeks of care would likely cure it. She stayed for 20 years. Chapter 10. The hospital Hermit Doctors Hospital on East End Avenue had once been one of New York's most fashionable medical facilities. Wealthy patients checked in for everything from childbirth to cosmetic procedures, enjoying private rooms and attentive service. By 1991, when Huguette Clark arrived, the hospital's reputation had faded somewhat. It would merge with Beth Israel Medical Center in 1994, becoming Beth Israel North, before eventually closing. But for Huguette, the hospital offered something her vast apartments could not: constant attention, round-the-clock nurses, doctors checking regularly, meals delivered on schedule. Someone always nearby if she needed help. The hospital provided structure and security that wealth alone couldn't purchase. The cancer treatment succeeded. Within weeks, the lesions were gone, the disfigurement healing. Her doctor, Henry Singman, strongly urged Huguette to go home. She had recovered fully. There was no medical reason to remain hospitalized. She refused. The hospital faced an unusual dilemma. Huguette Clark was clearly mentally competent. She could make her own decisions about where to live. If she wanted to pay for a hospital room as a long-term residence, did the hospital have grounds to evict her? More importantly, did the hospital want to evict an extremely wealthy patient who paid her bills promptly and caused no trouble? Huguette didn't use health insurance. She paid the daily room rate out of pocket, $829 per day. That was over $300,000 per year for a single room. The administrators made their choice. Huguette could stay. For the first several years, she occupied a room in Doctor's Hospital with a window overlooking Central Park. The 11th floor room provided views of the park she had painted decades earlier. But when the hospital merged with Beth Israel in 1994, she transferred downtown to the main Beth Israel campus. Her new room measured 14 feet by 24 feet. It contained 2 beds, though Huguette used only one. The window looked out onto another wing of the building, showing only walls and air conditioning units. No sky, no trees, just institutional architecture. From this room, Huguette Clark would live the final 17 years of her life. She hired private nurses to provide round-the-clock care. 3 8-hour shifts ensured someone was always present. The nurses came to know her quirks. She ate little of the hospital food, preferring crackers and sardines. She watched television constantly, especially cartoons. She spoke in French whenever possible, forcing nurses to learn basic phrases to communicate effectively. One nurse, Hadassah Perry, became particularly close to Huguette. Perry started working for her in 1991 and remained her primary caregiver until Huguette's death in 2011. Their relationship evolved beyond professional boundaries into something resembling friendship, or at least the closest thing to friendship that Huguette allowed. Perry listened to Huguette's stories. She looked at photographs from earlier decades. She helped maintain correspondence with the few people Huguette stayed in contact with. Most importantly, she provided daily human connection for someone who had systematically cut herself off from all other relationships. The hospital staff marveled at this eccentric patient. She required almost no medical care. Aside from vitamins, she took no daily medications. Her health remained remarkably good for someone in her 80s and eventually 90s. Yet she insisted on staying in the hospital, paying enormous sums for what amounted to a hotel room with nursing staff. Hospital administrators recognized an opportunity. Here was a woman worth over $300 million living in their facility. Fundraising became inevitable. In May 2004, when a developer wanted to tear down the Doctor's Hospital building to construct luxury apartments, hospital CEO Dr. Robert Newman saw a chance for a super mega gift. Newman and hospital chairman Morton Hyman visited Huguette in her room. Newman later wrote a memo documenting the conversation. They explained that Beth Israel was almost certain to sell the building. They had offers in hand, unless someone came forward with resources to preserve it. The implication was clear. Huguette could buy the building. She could donate it to the hospital. She could ensure her room remained available indefinitely. The hospital valued the property at $125 million. Huguette had her father's caution and stubbornness. She could have afforded to buy the building easily. Her liquid assets alone exceeded $150 million, not including real estate valued at another $150 million. But she refused. She agreed to move downtown to Beth Israel's main campus instead, transferring to the small windowless room where she would spend her final years. The shakedown failed. The hospital sold the building. Developers demolished it and erected condominiums as planned. This pattern of pressure for donations repeated. Hospital officials made regular visits, suggesting various ways Huguette might contribute. They asked for funding for new wings, equipment, research programs. Sometimes she gave modest amounts, but the huge gifts they hoped for never materialized. Meanwhile, Nurse Perry received gifts of a very different scale. Over the 20 years Perry worked for Huguette, she received approximately $35 million in cash and valuable objects. A 19-carat, nearly flawless rectangular-cut Cartier diamond ring worth $2 to $3 million. Cash payments far exceeding normal nurses' salaries. gifts that transformed Perry from working professional to wealthy woman. Was this generosity or manipulation? Did Huguette freely choose to reward someone who brought joy to her isolated existence? Or did Perry exploit a lonely, elderly patient cut off from family and normal social contacts? These questions would fuel legal battles after Huguette's death. But while alive, Huguette seemed content with the arrangement. Perry was reliable, attentive, and provided the companionship Huguette needed without demanding the emotional intimacy she couldn't provide. The money meant nothing to Huguette. She had more than she could ever spend. Why not share it with someone who made her days bearable? The hospital years established a final rhythm to Huguette's life. Wake, breakfast of crackers or simple fare. Television, especially cartoons and classic shows. Conversations in French with Perry or other nurses. Occasional phone calls with her goddaughter Wanda Steika or distant cousin Paul Clark Newell. Lunch, more television. Perhaps looking at photographs or discussing her art collection. Dinner, more television until sleep. Day after day, year after year. For 7,364 nights total, Huguette Clark lived in hospital rooms. The woman who owned 3 magnificent properties chose to spend her final decades in 336 square feet of institutional space. Bellosguardo sat 3,000 miles away, perfectly maintained at enormous cost, but completely empty. The Fifth Avenue apartments contained her collections, but no collector. The Connecticut chateau stood ready for occupancy. It would never receive all that real estate, all that beauty, all that careful preservation. And Huguette huddled in a hospital room watching cartoons. What she couldn't or wouldn't articulate was why. When cousin Paul Newell asked why she no longer visited Bellosguardo, she replied simply, "When I think of Santa Barbara, I always think of times there with my mother, and it makes me very sad." The memories hurt too much. Better to live in a space with no memories at all. Better to create no new attachments to places that might be lost. The hospital room was temporary, anonymous, requiring no emotional investment. Perfect for someone determined to feel nothing. Chapter 11. The Untouched Palace. While Huguette lived in her hospital room, Bellosguardo existed in a state of suspended animation. The staff she employed followed her instructions precisely. Maintain everything, change nothing. John Douglas served as estate manager for over 30 years. He supervised the small crew that kept the property functioning. Gardeners tended the lawns and rose garden. Housekeepers cleaned rooms no one entered. Maintenance workers repaired systems and structures that no one used. All of them devoted their careers to preserving a house for an owner who refused to visit. The circular rose garden bloomed year after year. Staff recorded each variety and mapped locations, prepared to restore any plant that failed. Paths were swept clean of leaves. The reflecting pool remained crystal clear. Walking through the grounds, a visitor would see no evidence of abandonment. Everything looked ready for the owner's imminent return. Inside the house, time stopped more visibly. Linens were removed from beds and wrapped in brown paper by a houseman in the 1960s. Each package was carefully dated and signed, preserving not just the linens, but the moment of their storage. They remained wrapped for decades. Dishes were washed and covered in the 1990s, again with dates marking, when the work was done. Tables were set as if for dinner parties that would never occur. Chairs stood at exact angles around dining tables. Nothing moved, nothing changed. In the garage, automobiles sat with 1949 license plates still attached. The cars hadn't been driven in over half a century, but they were maintained mechanically. Fluids were changed. Tires were inflated. If Huguette had suddenly appeared and wanted to go for a drive, the cars would have started. Huguette's private wing remained particularly untouched. The painting studio with its 17-foot ceilings held canvases and supplies, arranged as she had left them. The loft space still stored artworks. The private kitchenette remained stocked. The back stairway leading to her bedroom showed no footprints in the dust. Staff sometimes spoke of the eerie quality of working in an empty house that had to appear inhabited. They cleaned rooms, knowing no one would enter them before the next cleaning. They maintained gardens, knowing no one would walk those paths. The work felt like performance art, creating the illusion of occupancy for an audience of one who never came to watch. Occasionally, Douglas would contact Huguette about necessary decisions. Did she want to replace aging trees in the garden? Should they update certain systems in the house? Her answer was always the same: keep everything as Mother knew it. Replace failing trees with identical species planted in the exact same locations. Repair systems rather than upgrading them. Preserve, don't improve. The substantial monthly expenses covered salaries for the small staff, utilities for a 27-room house, property taxes on 23 acres of prime Santa Barbara real estate, insurance, supplies, and endless small repairs. Those carrying costs totaled roughly $500,000 annually, a sum that would have bankrupted most property owners within a few years. But Huguette's fortune easily absorbed the costs. Her financial advisors managed investments conservatively, generating returns far exceeding Bellosguardo's carrying costs. The money mattered less than the preservation. As long as the house remained perfect, the expense was justified. Neighbors noticed the property's strange status. Lights appeared on timers, creating the illusion of occupancy. But cars never drove through the gates. No parties disturbed the quiet. No one walked the gardens or sat on the terraces overlooking the Pacific. The most beautiful house in Santa Barbara stood empty year after year. Speculation grew about the mysterious owner. Some knew the property belonged to a reclusive heiress in New York. Others invented elaborate stories about why she never returned. The mystery deepened the property's legend, making it more fascinating than any occupied mansion could be. Inside, the collections Huguette had installed decades earlier gathered dust despite regular cleaning. Art hung on walls that no one viewed. Furniture arranged by Anna in the 1930s maintained those same positions into the 21st century. Every object became a monument to the past. The contrast between Bellosguardo and Huguette's hospital room couldn't have been more stark. 22,000 square feet versus 336 square feet. 27 rooms versus one room. Ocean views versus views of an adjacent building. Yet Huguette chose the hospital, rejected the mansion. Douglas and his crew understood they were maintaining more than a house. They were preserving Huguette's memories of Anna, frozen at the moment those memories were happiest. The house Anna built. The gardens Anna designed. The rooms Anna filled with carefully chosen furniture and art. Bellosguardo was Anna's creation, and Huguette would preserve it as a shrine. But shrines demand worship, and worship requires presence. Huguette offered only money and instruction from 3,000 miles away. She paid for preservation, but couldn't bring herself to participate in it. The house she loved existed only in memory, perfect and unchanging, because she never returned to see how time and absence actually affected it. Douglas wrote to the Bellosguardo Foundation Board in November 2017, shortly before the property transferred from estate control to foundation ownership. He reminded them that he and his colleagues had dedicated careers to this work. "I have been a loyal, diligent, and honorable employee," he wrote. "There is not a building, system, tree, bush, or even blade of grass at Bellosguardo that has not been thoughtfully administered to under my supervision." He was right. The house John Douglas maintained was the house Anna built. Every detail preserved, every intention honored. It had taken 30 years and millions of dollars, but Bellosguardo remained exactly as Huguette demanded, unchanged and waiting. Chapter 12. Death and the Battle for Millions. On May 24, 2011, Huguette Marcel Clark died at Beth Israel Medical Center in Manhattan. She was 104 years old, just weeks from her 105th birthday. The nurses who had cared for her for 2 decades were present. Her attorney, Wallace Bach, was informed immediately. Her accountant, Irving Kamsler, received word. The hospital made arrangements for the body. What Huguette didn't have at her death was family. No children from her brief marriage, no siblings from Anna's marriage to William. No close relatives who had maintained contact through her decades of isolation. The nearest blood relations were distant cousins, great-nieces, and great-nephews descended from William A. Clark's first marriage. 19 of these distant relatives emerged after Huguette's death, many never having met her. Some had tried to contact her over the years, sending cards or letters that went unanswered. Others had given up decades earlier, assuming the reclusive heiress wanted nothing to do with them. Now they learned she had died, leaving an estate valued at over $300 million. On June 22, 2011, Huguette's last will and testament was filed in New York Surrogate's Court. Attorneys revealed that there were actually two wills. The first will, signed in 2005, left the bulk of her estate to family members. The 19 distant relatives would receive millions each. The distribution followed traditional inheritance patterns, recognizing blood relationships even when personal relationships had long since lapsed. But just 6 weeks after signing the first will, Huguette had signed a second one. This version told a very different story. The second will left 75% of her estate, approximately $300 million, to charity. The newly created Bellosguardo Foundation would receive the Santa Barbara property, plus $8 million in operating funds. The Corcoran Gallery would get a Monet water lily painting. Various charities received smaller bequests. Nurse Hadassah Perry would receive $30 million. Huguette's goddaughter Wanda Steika would get $12 million. Employees who had managed Huguette's residences and affairs would receive $2 million total. Beth Israel Hospital, where Huguette had lived for 20 years, would get $1 million. Attorney Bach and accountant Kamsler would each receive $500,000. The 19 relatives were completely excluded. The family members immediately contested the second will. They argued that Huguette lacked mental capacity when she signed it, that she had been unduly influenced by those around her, particularly Perry, Bach, and Kamsler, that the second will didn't reflect her true wishes, but rather the manipulation of people exploiting a vulnerable, isolated woman. The legal battle consumed years. Both sides hired expensive attorneys. Depositions were taken, medical records examined, witnesses questioned about Huguette's mental state during her final years. The relatives painted a picture of systematic exploitation. Perry had received $35 million in gifts during her employment, far beyond any reasonable compensation for nursing services. Bach and Kamsler had controlled Huguette's finances for years, making decisions that benefited themselves. The hospital had pressured her for donations while knowing she was mentally fragile. Bach and the other beneficiaries countered that Huguette had been entirely competent. She made her own decisions. She chose to reward people who had been loyal to her, rather than relatives she had never met. She wanted her fortune used for arts and charity, not divided among strangers who happened to share distant ancestors. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation in August 2011, examining whether Bach and Kamsler had defrauded Huguette. The investigation dragged on for years without charges being filed, though its existence put additional pressure on the estate. Proceedings. Separate litigation targeted Beth Israel. Huguette's estate sued the hospital for $95 million, alleging the hospital had unscrupulously bilked her during her 20-year residency. The lawsuit claimed hospital officials had exploited her mental fragility and fear of leaving to extract donations and payments far beyond reasonable costs. In August 2015, a Manhattan judge ruled that the statute of limitations had expired on the estate's claims against Beth Israel. The hospital escaped the lawsuit. The estate appealed, but ultimately lost. Beth Israel had been aggressive in fundraising, perhaps even predatory, but legally, time had run out for accountability. The main estate battleground toward settlement. Neither side wanted a public trial where intimate details of Huguette's life would be exposed. In September 2013, both parties reached an agreement. Under the settlement terms, the second will would stand with some modifications, though 19 family members would split $34.5 million. The Bellosguardo Foundation would receive the Santa Barbara property, plus funds. Perry's $30 million bequest was reduced but not eliminated. Bach and Kamsler forfeited their personal bequests and resigned as executors. Various other adjustments balanced competing interests. It wasn't complete victory for anyone, but it ended the public fighting. The settlement preserved Huguette's core intention that Bellosguardo become an arts foundation while providing something to the relatives who had been entirely cut out. As part of the settlement, the Internal Revenue Service had to review and approve the estate's tax treatment. Those negotiations stretched through the following years, delaying final distributions. In December 2018, the settlement with the IRS was finally approved by the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. The final accounting showed the Bellosguardo Foundation receiving assets, appraised at over $95 million in the original probate proceedings. The 23-acre property alone was conservatively valued at $85 million. Furnishings, art, and other assets added millions more. Huguette's extensive doll collection presented special challenges. The foundation retained a small selection of historically significant pieces for display at Bellosguardo. The rest went to auction in January 2020 through Terrio's, the same auction house Huguette had worked with anonymously for decades. The doll auction became an event. Collectors from around the world bid on pieces from the legendary Clark collection. A 12-inch bisque doll named Suzette, which Huguette had owned since childhood and kept in an old wooden box with handmade clothes, sold for $27,450. Other rare French dolls brought similar prices. The auction raised nearly $2 million for the foundation. The legal battles had cost the estate millions in attorney fees and reduced some bequests, but they also brought clarity. Bellosguardo would become what Huguette wanted, a center for arts and culture open to the public, preserving her mother's vision while serving the Santa Barbara community. On December 21, 2017, exactly 6.5 years after Huguette's death, the Bellosguardo property was formally transferred to foundation ownership. The long wait was over. The work of transformation could begin. Chapter 13. Bellosguardo's Rebirth. The Bellosguardo Foundation inherited both a magnificent property and an enormous responsibility. The house hadn't been updated substantially since Anna built it in the 1930s. Systems needed modernization. The collections required conservation. Most importantly, the house needed transformation from private residence to public cultural center. The foundation formed with board members representing different constituencies. One seat went to the family members who had challenged the will, represented by Ian Devine, a great-grandnephew of Huguette. One went to the former Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, which William A. Clark had supported, and which had merged with the National Gallery. One went to Huguette's Santa Barbara attorney. Additional board members were nominated by Santa Barbara's mayor and chosen by the New York Attorney General. This deliberately diverse board ensured no single interest would dominate. Family, art world, legal, local community, and state oversight all had voices. The structure reflected the complexity of Huguette's legacy and the competing claims on her memory. The first challenge was physical. The house needed a fire suppression system to meet modern safety codes for public occupancy. Air conditioning had to be installed carefully to avoid damaging artwork while making the house comfortable for visitors. Lighting required updating to properly illuminate collections while preserving delicate materials. Accessibility features needed addition to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. All of this had to be accomplished without destroying the historical integrity that made Bellosguardo significant. The foundation hired specialists in historical preservation who understood how to modernize invisibly. Work proceeded slowly, carefully, with constant attention to maintaining the character Anna and Huguette had created. The collections required expert attention. 40 of Huguette's paintings were brought from New York storage and carefully restored. The Santa Barbara Historical Museum mounted an exhibition in 2022 titled Huguette Marcel Clark, A Portrait of the Artist. For the first time since the 1929 Corcoran show, the public could see Huguette's artistic work. The paintings revealed a talent that had remained hidden for nearly a century. Huguette's Japanese-inspired works, self-portraits, and landscape paintings demonstrated serious artistic engagement. Museum visitors who expected amateur work from a wealthy dilettante instead found accomplished paintings that rewarded close viewing. The doll collection that remained with the foundation after the Terrio's auction was carefully conserved and displayed. French bisque dolls from the 1860s through 1890s were placed in climate-controlled cases. Japanese cultural dolls found positions near Huguette's paintings, demonstrating her integrated interest in Japanese arts. Miniature architectural models were positioned to allow detailed viewing of their extraordinary craftsmanship. The grounds required attention as well. The circular rose garden had been maintained all along, but it needed renewing after nearly a century. The original planting maps allowed the foundation to restore varieties that had failed or been replaced. New roses were carefully selected to match those Anna had chosen in the 1930s. The oak trees that had grown to maturity around the reflecting pool now provided the shade and majesty Anna had envisioned when she planted young saplings. The entire landscape had finally achieved the vision she conceived during the Great Depression. In October 2018, the foundation hosted its inaugural fundraiser. More than 500 people paid $1,500 or more to tour the previously forbidden estate. They walked through rooms Huguette had preserved but abandoned. They viewed art she had collected. They explored gardens she had funded but never returned to see. The event raised substantial funds and proved public interest in the property. Santa Barbara residents and visitors wanted access to this mysterious mansion they had known only from the outside. The foundation committed to regular programming that would justify its nonprofit arts mission while generating revenue for operations. Public tours began on a limited basis in 2023. The foundation released tickets in batches through its email list. 90-minute docent-led tours allowed small groups to explore the first floor and gardens. Tickets sold out quickly, demonstrating continuing fascination with Huguette's story. Visitors encountered the preserved world of Anna and Huguette Clark, the music room with Anna's harps, the library with its thousands of volumes, the dining room with its painted canvas ceiling, the foyer with views through to the reflecting pool, Huguette's studio with her paintings displayed. But the most interesting room proved to be Huguette's former art studio, now gallery space. French and Japanese dolls sat lifelike on doll-sized chairs. 40 of her paintings lined the walls, including several self-portraits. The combination revealed Huguette's personality more effectively than any written biography could. Here was someone devoted to beauty, precision, and preservation. Someone who saw art as both creation and control. The foundation announced plans to expand access gradually. Eventually, second-floor tours would allow visitors to see Huguette's private suite. Additional programming would include musical performances, lectures, and events that activated the house beyond static museum exhibitions. The vision articulated by board member Sandy Nicholson captured the foundation's goals: to open it as a dynamic venue for cultural and artistic events, while showcasing the unique history of the Clarks, and specifically Huguette Clark's contribution to the arts. Bellosguardo would fulfill Anna's original intention as a place of beauty and culture. It would honor Huguette's preservation instincts by maintaining the house she refused to change. It would serve the Santa Barbara community she had supported through the Andre Clark Bird Refuge. It would demonstrate that even the most withdrawn life could produce lasting public benefit. The transformation from empty mansion to active cultural center took years of legal battles, conservation, work, and careful planning. But in 2023, 60 years after Huguette last visited, and 12 years after her death, Bellosguardo finally achieved its purpose. Not as a private retreat, not as a frozen monument, as a living institution that connected past to present through art, architecture, and the peculiar story of the woman who chose memory over presence. Closing. On a barrier island in Palm Beach, Florida, there stands a palace that was never supposed to survive, but did. Mar-a-Lago transformed from Marjorie Merriweather Post's dream into a thriving private club, reimagined but fundamentally preserved. On a cliff in Santa Barbara, California, there stands a chateau that was always supposed to survive and finally has. Bellosguardo waited 6 decades for the public life its builder intended. 2 women, 2 fortunes. 2 vastly different relationships with the estates that define their legacies. Marjorie Post built Mar-a-Lago for entertaining, for demonstrating American achievement, for gathering important people and creating memorable occasions. She filled it with life and noise and purpose. When she could no longer maintain it herself, she tried to give it to the nation so others could continue that tradition. When the nation declined, the house found a businessman who understood that spectacular architecture requires constant use to justify its existence. Huguette Clark inherited Bellosguardo from a mother who built it as a refuge. She preserved it obsessively, but never returned after Anna's death, choosing instead to remember it from 3,000 miles away. The house sat frozen for 60 years, maintained at enormous expense for an owner who refused to visit. When she finally relinquished control through death, The house found its purpose serving the public. Anna and Huguette had spent lifetimes avoiding. Post's story follows a familiar arc of American wealth: build grandly, entertain lavishly. When circumstances change, adapt. The mansion became a club. The dream evolved but continued. Life went on within those walls, different but vibrant. Clark's story charts stranger territory: the Copper King's daughter who turned wealth into isolation, the artist who hid her work, the collector who surrounded herself with dolls that never changed, never aged, never disappointed, the heiress who spent her final decades in a hospital room rather than any of her three magnificent properties. What drove Huguette's choices? The grief over Andre never processed, never healed? The failed marriage that convinced her relationships brought only pain? Anna's death that severed her last connection to the world? Or simply an introvert's preference taken to its logical extreme when unlimited money removed all barriers to total withdrawal? The paintings she left behind suggest someone who saw beauty and wanted desperately to preserve it. The dolls demonstrate someone who needed permanence in a world defined by loss. The empty mansions reveal someone for whom memories mattered more than experiences, who preferred perfect recollections to imperfect reality. Bellosguardo achieved its final form not through Huguette's presence, but through her absence. She kept it perfect by abandoning it. She preserved it by refusing to change even the smallest detail. She ensured its survival by spending millions to maintain what she couldn't bear to visit. Anna built Bellosguardo as a place of beauty during the Depression, providing work and creating something lasting when the world seemed to be falling apart. Huguette kept it beautiful through her isolation, protecting it from time's erosion by locking it away from life itself. Now, the Bellosguardo Foundation opens it to the public Anna never wanted to engage with, and Huguette actively feared. The circle completes itself strangely. A house built for privacy becomes a public institution. A woman who hid from society leaves a legacy that serves the community. An estate, frozen in time, to prevent change, finally changes by opening its doors. Visitors walking through Bellosguardo today encounter Huguette's story in physical form: the pristine preservation, the carefully maintained gardens, the collections displayed as if their owner might return at any moment, the art she created but rarely showed, the dolls she loved more safely than people. They also encounter Anna's vision: the elegant proportions, the quality craftsmanship, the understanding that a house should provide refuge while still celebrating beauty, the belief that art and culture matter enough to invest millions in their creation and preservation. And inevitably, they encounter William A. Clark's shadow: the fortune extracted from Montana copper, the ruthless business practices, the bribed Senate seat, the ostentatious Fifth Avenue mansion demolished after only 20 years, the legacy transformed by a daughter who used that wealth so differently from how her father accumulated it. 3 generations. 3 different relationships with the fortune copper created: the robber baron who built an empire, the refined wife who translated his excess into elegance, the reclusive daughter who turned inheritance into isolation. Bellosguardo survived them all. It survived William's death in 1925. It survived the earthquake that destroyed the original mansion. It survived Anna's construction during the Depression. It survived Huguette's 60-year absence. It survived legal battles over her estate. It emerged finally as something none of them quite intended, but all contributed to creating: a public monument to private griefs, private dreams, and the strange power of preservation. The house Huguette loved too much to visit now welcomes the visitors she spent a lifetime avoiding. The collections she assembled in solitude now educate the public. The beauty she hoarded in memory now serves the community. What she desperately tried to keep private has become inevitably public. What she tried to freeze in time has been released to change and grow. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony of extreme wealth deployed in service of extreme isolation. You can build walls, you can maintain perfection, you can pay staff to preserve every detail, but eventually, time wins. Eventually, the world you tried to keep out finds its way in. Eventually, even the most carefully preserved memories become history, and history belongs to everyone. Huguette Marcel Clark was born in Paris in 1906 to a father born before the Civil War and a mother young enough to be his granddaughter. She died in Manhattan in 2011, her life spanning from the Titanic to September 11th, from horse-drawn carriages to smartphones, from the Gilded Age to the digital age. In between, she built a fortress of isolation from wealth that was supposed to open doors. Bellosguardo was her most perfect achievement, a place she loved so completely she dared not risk seeing it change. A house maintained, in perpetual readiness for a return that never came. A monument to grief, beauty, and the impossibility of keeping anything unchanged forever. Now it changes. Now it lives. Now it serves. And perhaps that's exactly what Huguette needed it to do all along, even if she could never admit it. Sometimes the houses we abandon are the ones that finally find their purpose. Sometimes the treasures we hoard serve their highest function when we finally let them go. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who appreciates history and architecture. These stories of American wealth and the estates that embody them reveal as much about who we are as a culture as they do about the individuals who built them.